Ever since Papa became bedridden with the consumption, the house of Arcane has for years been in a state of melancholy and woe. Initially, liquidating parts of the family marionette business was sufficient to withstand the pitying glances at the country club, while Papa pleaded His Holiness forgiveness for the incident with the Corsican maid in Ibiza.
It depends upon what the meaning of the word is. Yes.
But the recurring curse of that infamous decade or so economic habit of the bear market proved the family's investment in gilded-haired bonobos worthless. In desperation, Mama thought of marrying Sweet Rosie off to that beast most foul he'd make the devil himself churl, the dreaded Duke of Dubershire. Knowing the awful life which awaits her, Sweet Rosie has fallen into such despair and madness over her sordid fate, she's come to believe she's shell-shocked from her tour in a war she was yet born for.
Don't tell me I don't know what Vietnam is like!
Now, to save not just me or Rosie, but all of House Arcane from the ever-encroaching lich of financial doom, I must make my miracle by discovering my fortune somewhere. And so on knees begging, I plead. Like, share, subscribe, and support the Ko-Fi. Okay. What's everyone talking about now? Oh. You guys are sick of open world games? You're sick of all the copy-paste map icons and whatever? You guys video game journalists or something? Is it your job to play the latest Ubisoft Space Pirate Adventure Quest released or whatever? You know you could do something else, right? I know it's kind of dumb advice to suggest going out into the open world if you're sick of open worlds. Understandably not the most attractive prospect, with it being freezing and non-insubstantial part of the world right now, as the script is being written. But like, you guys know there's other things to do inside other than play video games, right? You can try to force yourself through a book to make it seem like you're smart. Watch a Ukrainian New Wave film before closing the streaming tab to rewatch Neon Genesis Evangelion for the 50th time. Be a financially responsible adult and familiarize yourself with different stocks and bonds. Give up on everything due to the state of the world and slowly drink yourself to unalive. You save a lot of money on the last one too, if you do it inside instead of heading to a bar. I kid. Any kid about what's close to home. My apologies. I don't mean to perpetuate too much this bad stereotype of gamers as a collection of out-of-shape ne'er-do-wells, whining too much in bad hygiene, and clothes that haven't been washed in months. Much like members of other marginalized communities, gamers live normal lives and are all around you. Believe it or not, some hold jobs, have families, and are even your neighbors.
I've been informed personally by some of the men at the gay bars I refuse to stop going to, despite being straight. They dress decently, with the light striking them just right. Some are even quite dashing.
Make sure you're dressed like what you really are, trash!
Alright. You guys had your laughs? You glued to your seats? You chuckled? You buckled? Alright, let's get this going.
So, yeah. This video is kind of contrarian take, meant to get views for this new channel and generate discourse. Won't treat you guys like you're dumb. Been hearing a lot about how people are sick of open worlds. Reading it too. Why, you can even hear people chatting about it on the streets, like that coworker you talk games with, or over a drink with a friend. We've all seen that Elden Ring meme image on X. On Reddit. I assume a lot of you use the site. I don't. Maybe some of you made the poor decision while young and dumb to always finish your homework every night, doing well enough in your classes to head to grad school, and are now thousands in debts and slaving away with committee meetings, and are eternally searching for full-time professor jobs which no longer exist, instead of doing the smart thing of skipping class to play video games and trying to strike it rich in the video game video essay minds. If you're even doing that. I get it. You're busy.
But for those of us who've made, if not good, better decisions with what we do with our limited time on this earth. We all know how this conversation thing goes.
There are too many games on the market that have these big wide worlds that say, hey, go do anything you want. You can go here. You can go there. You can even get to your destination on a pretty mare. You can even do the humanly impossible by fighting bears. Sick of the busy streets of the city? How about going underground where it's shitty? You can swim next to the beaches. You can even converse with all the sneeches.
Stop talking!
Yet, it's like, do I want to? Is there really something super interesting on this bit of grass on the west corner of the map that's intriguing in a way a bit of grass on the southeastern side of the map isn't? Then you have the icons from the meme. All these indications for activities that make your player character stronger, and after you get a sufficient bit of power from a few, you don't do anymore because the tasks are repetitive and aren't all that interesting. With Minecraft being one of the biggest things in the world, every game has to have a crafting system now. So what fills the space between boring activities is shiny junk you rarely use because knowing the mechanics of combat in a game is enough to get by most encounters. Generally. A lot of open worlds also have this weird thing where the story is super linear, so at best for a lot of them, you're kinda going from one main mission icon to the next in-game, skipping much of the open world. That's kind of the selling point for the game, and are just kind of doing things in a main story which don't feel all too different from playing a more linear action game like Half-Life or Uncharted.
Alright, there's good reason for the I'm so sick of open worlds take. Not denying.
There are too many bad too. Okay, this is fine, but why am I playing this instead of literally doing anything else? Open world games crowding the market. Trend started last gen, continues this one. Open world games are kind of the shooters of the 360 PS3 generation and the 3D platforms of the PS1 Nintendo 64 era. There's a lot of them, and too many are just...
The arts are the contrarian take. I think it's at its best if your take breaking from dominant opinions is both correct, and you gotta mean it.
Yeah, you can get a lot of traffic and attention saying something silly and make people understandably disgusted by pointing to something like Lolicon and make a big proclamation to the world. You fools, this is our Sistine Chapel. I mean, I guess there are people in this world who'd argue that. Moving on. Yeah, I really like open world games. I think they're even like the genre to demonstrate what video games do well as a medium. Some of them, at least. And you like them too. I know it. Stop gaslighting me saying you don't. A list of the best-selling video games of all time is easily accessible information. And you know what genre from recently released titles absolutely litters that list?
Guacamole.
Open world games. If you don't like open world games, you're saying something odd with your wallet. Oh, but Arcane.
We're actually team here, and you're a friend, so you can call me Andrew.
But those best-selling open world games are like The Witcher 3, Grand Theft Auto 5, Breath of the Wild, Elden Ring, Red Dead Redemption 2. Those are the good ones everyone likes. Of course, if you focus on the good games in a genre, you can claim it's good. That's just obvious, dummy. It's no wonder you're making video essays instead of writing the treatise on German idealism you always wanted.
Well, buddy, you are yet another close confidant of mine who has betrayed me and broken my trust. Don't worry, I'm used to it. You're just going on my list of people to ruin later at some point.
But yeah, that list of the best-selling open world games includes not just games that have been incredibly commercially successful, like, I think the record for the best-selling entertainment product ever still belongs to GTA 5. Predominantly, the best-selling open world games are also what we easily would agree upon as being the best in quality, too. Those games include Skyrim, Tears of the Kingdom, the other titles my ex-friend now internal enemy already mentioned. It's not just that open world games sell well. When a noticeable one is released, it's usually the talk of the year. A well-made open world game is likely to be the favorite for the Game of the Year candidate in any given year. That list of best-selling open world games coincides with some of the best reviewed games ever. If you check the Metacritic score for Breath of the Wild, Elden Ring, Red Dead, etc., you'll see their critic scores all being a dark green high 90. The obvious bit of explanation here is that these fantastic open world games are great, we enjoy them all, and then their market success gives publishers the wise idea to put out a bunch of mediocre junk that's, unless it's literally your job to play every new recent release, are best in ever touch to do literally anything else. Story of why there's so many shooters in the 360 era. Why there are so many platformers for the first 3D consoles. Capitalism, baby. Everyone wants a piece of what's working for somebody else.
But for there to be an existing market for cynical publishers to put out junk, there has to be a more elaborate reason why open world games sell so fantastically well in the first place. And I go so far to say what really good open world games do very well is kind of the reason why video games are an interesting entertainment and artistic medium to begin with. To explain why, I think I'll give a personal anecdote about what got me into games as a kid.
This is the Loblaws I used to frequent quite a bit when I visited my now deceased grandfather while growing up. It's not that I had a love of produce when I was 4 or 5. Even when I was young, the small apartment drove me insane. You can understand how it drove me mad in more recent years if you read more of my fiction. Link in bio. There was rarely anything to do in it besides watch too much TV. And while my parents tried to get me into reading while young by buying me all these children's fantasy books to try and help me develop a love for the written word, I could never get into them. My love of books didn't start until adolescence, when I was of the age and becoming the type of annoying teenager who questions everything that highbrow modernist novels and philosophy help satiate. But before my real reading years, I could always feel long stretches of time while laying in a room when I tried to get through Narnia or The Hobbit or whatever. I can't exactly remember the timeline well, when the Lord of the Rings and the Narnia movies came out and my different summers spent here, but I can recall my attitude to fantasy books and movies and TV being, why would I ever read a book when I can watch something? The allure of squiggles and white blank space on a page was way less appealing than music, acting, and action projected on a screen. My parents and teachers would claim to me that books were better than movies because, oh, a movie is someone else's interpretation of a world. When you're reading Narnia, you're creating your own version of C.S. Lewis's world with your imagination. Well, you know what? Despite what a certain romantic herd in the culture might tell you, that childhood is the peak of creative life, imagination and creativity actually fully develops in adulthood. There are studies confirming this, look them up. And my childhood imagination was not even in the running to compete with some of the best visual artists in Hollywood. So I rarely read to live in a fantasy world. I watched a linear story on a screen to see events and a plot happen in a world I couldn't physically explore. Watching a world for several hours indoors would get super boring, mind you, for a kid who needed to run around a backyard to get the energy out of his legs. So on top of resolving the issue when I was here by obviously just going outside, I head to this Loblaws. I'm giving my age by relating this, but retail stores used to all have these little demo consoles in the aisle where they sold electronic stuff and everything. They don't do that anymore. Mix of the consoles and controllers breaking from thousands of kids going to the demo stations, and gaming being big enough where they don't need to promote video games in physical locations anymore. But yeah, before my parents bought a PS2 for the DVD player like a lot of parents did, my experience with falling in love with games came from those little demo stations. And I can recall exactly the title, which caused me to develop this bad little habit I've continued with well into adulthood. It was this Nintendo 64 title with cartoon characters marketed to kids, starring a bear and bird. It wasn't that Banjo and Kazooie were interesting cartoon mascots that caused me to fall in love with gaming. Lots of great cartoon characters in cartoons. I could stay inside and watch SpongeBob's Adventures Bikini Bottom if I wanted to. It was rather, instead of just watching Banjo and Kazooie explore this world on my screen of grassy mountains, dank caves, and tropical beaches with funny characters to talk to, after watching some other kid looking up with a controller in his hands, and seeing that his inputs on the controller matched the actions Banjo and Kazooie would do, I realized, wow, I'm the one who could be walking, jumping, and ground pounding through all this. I could be actively exploring this cartoony world, and not just watch characters in it. After that, spell was cast, and I was done. Mario 64 sold really, really well, and yeah, capitalism again, baby. But I think more than any other reason 3D platformers were a scourge during the first generation of 3D gaming was because they were the main genre to take advantage of exploring a third-dimensional environment. You know, yeah, to repeat what I said in my Dark Souls video, link in the description if you didn't watch it. Besides adventure titles like Zelda, a lot of early 3D games are quasi 2D experiences with quote-unquote better graphics than the 16-bit generation. However, in Mario 64, you're exploring a bunch of interesting, fantastic locations, and with the Nintendo 64 joystick, you could walk around whatever cartoony level Nintendo developed for you as your little sandbox. It'd be a cartoon world you'd be exploring in a 3D platformer, principally. With most of these games on Nintendo 64 and a few on other consoles like the PS1, they were all cartoony mascot games for kids. And because developers thought putting googly eyes and a smiling face on a bunch of animals and inanimate objects was enough to create an interesting world, the genre kinda died within a couple years, besides for Mr. Video Games himself, which kinda makes sense. They were all collectathons focused on finding little tokens, even the good ones. And importantly for platformers, a genre of games which heavily features jumping around and other acts of athleticism, Mario 64 was the only 3D platformer of the generation where it felt good to actually jump around, instead of just slowly double jumping everywhere with this feeling of floatiness. Nostalgia blinds you. None of these games are too great now besides Mario 64, and maybe the Banjo games. Personally, I think they play just okay. Mario 64 hasn't aged too well itself. But it was super cool as a kid to be at those demo stations, or being at a friend's house and feeling like I was exploring a weird and wacky world in Glover, Donkey Kong 64, and even Gek. What can I say? Despite falling in love with the games due to the 3D platformer, as said, I kinda didn't get around to really fully enjoy the genre in its heyday. It'd be until the PS2 when I received my first console that I got the opportunity to actually own my own games, instead of borrowing them from neighbors. Some of my first games for my PS2 were 3D platformers like Pac-Man World 2, and more importantly for my points, Jak and Daxter. The original Jak and Daxter definitely did everything 3D platformers of the previous generation did well, and better frankly. Yeah, it was a collectathon, but you were regularly doing different and interesting things to collect power cells, the game's little star tokens for progression. More importantly for why Jak and Daxter is an example of the rare good non-Mario 3D platformer, is that you had an interesting setting. Had this little world with different colored egos based on different natural settings, obviously taking inspiration from various religious mythologies. Definitely distinct from the number of platformers starring cartoon animals. Game's world was filled with these elf-like people and the ocelot who talked too much. Yeah, Dexter was kind of annoying, but there was a real imagination into the writing and design of these characters, and also to the explorable setting. There's the usual platformer beats of jungle, tropics, volcano, and snow areas, but the precursor architecture stuff all kind of helped elevate everything into the feel of a real place that wasn't just a tick of platformer tropes. The underwater level in the second hub world was particularly very cool. Remember it fondly. However, in the sequels, Naughty Dog wasn't too interested in maintaining the cool tone and style of the original game. I guess because market trends told them other things are popular. The Grand Theft Auto 3 trilogy changed everything. Some of the best-selling and most critically revered games of the 6th generation of consoles. You don't sell several million copies of anything and not cause seismic ripples in your industry. Immediately after their release, there were a number of open-world games that came out, and like with any game more or less responsible for a genre like Dark Souls and Doom, they were all called clones. GTA clones. To be fair, a lot of open world games of the generation did prioritize causing mayhem and stealing vehicles like Grand Theft Auto. Grand Theft Auto 3 itself hasn't aged well. Missions are basic, it kind of felt okay killing pedestrians because the world didn't feel like a lived place. Its Liberty City barely resembled New York. Like, most of us have at least visited New York at least once, right? This is not Times Square. The decision to have a silent protagonist made all the cutscenes seem super awkward too, as if they're just an assortment of characters giving directions to a 1950s lobotomy victim. There's also a real sense in GTA 3 at least, that organizations are added because various crime groups are cool. You start out working for the Mafia because in the 2000s everyone had seen The Godfather, Goodfellas, and The Sopranos. They showed mobsters being cool guys, so a cool game should have mobsters too. Once you get to the second island, you're working for the Yakuza, because the Yakuza has cool things like honor, tattoos, being Japanese. it doesn't really matter if it doesn't make sense that Yakuza has a significant presence in a fictionalized depiction of New York. GTA 3 is among the products from the 1990s, early 2000s like South Park, Eminem, and torture porn horror movies that, while supposedly for a mature audience, definitely most appeals to the demographic of 16-year-old boys, and prioritizes including things in game meant more to appeal to the demographic than be realistic. Unique period in the culture. I don't know if I miss it. The real appeal of the original GTA 3 trilogy was causing as much mayhem as possible freely within a place that tried to replicate a recognizable American city with those little rectangles that attempted to resemble buildings. So, with graphical advancements in the medium, these games aren't too immersive. But is driving a car down a sidewalk 60 miles per hour to see pedestrian after pedestrian be run over super realistic? The point was the chaos. I think most of us have memories of going over to a friend's place whose parents allowed them at 10 to own the media controversy of the decade, to take turns with cheat codes killing as many NPCs and cops as possible before death, and then handing over the controller. If GTA 3 was kind of the ingredients in the pot before baking, Rockstar improved their formula extraordinarily quickly in the course of a year with Vice City still being decent to go back to, despite some dated aspects. And San Andreas is not only one of the best games of all time, it's aged well to the point where it plays like a recently released Rockstar game. Bit of an exaggeration, but more or less, which may be viewed as an insult to modern Rockstar games, saying that a 20-year-old game doesn't feel too different from a game released in 2018. To be clear, that's not my perspective. Red Dead Redemption 2 is one of my favorite games. 7th generation was dominated by the shooter, as mentioned. Generally, shooter. There were different types of shooters. Third-person wall-hugging games, and shooters where you played an unreliable narrator. There is also a growing interest in open worlds, which hinted at their eventual domination in the industry you all love to hate. Rockstar remained kings of the genre. Red Dead 1 is a masterpiece, and yeah, I'll say it, so is GTA 4. Bethesda was quickly making a name for themselves in this generation too, moving away from a PC focus to the stain of Morrowind fans everywhere, to release Oblivion, Fallout 3, New Vegas, and Skyrim. Okay, and Ubisoft was establishing their formula this generation too, with Far Cry and Assassin's Creed. But we used to like those games. That changed for reasons, but you talk to anyone and they'll say, yeah, I hate Ubisoft, but Assassin's Creed 2 and Black Flag were alright. A lot of us have fond memories of these games, not just the Ubisoft games, but the Bethesda, Rockstar, what I said. They sold well, which led to the general scourge of open world games in the 8th and 9th generations of consoles we all, apparently, have to suffer through now. Such awful titles including Breath of the Wild, The Witcher 3, GTA 5, Fallout 4, Red Dead Redemption 2, Elden Ring, Tears of the Kingdom.
Yeah, of course, I'm being sarcastic. But to the point of the video, these are games which not only represent the last generation of consoles in our collective memory space, but are also referred to as some of the best games of all time.
You check recently released games that earn Best Of, it's principally, for the most part, I know Baldur's Gate 3 and recent Persona games are there too, games from the open world list I just mentioned.
The boring answer for why open world fatigue exists is that the games mentioned have sold really well, publishers want an easy buck, and dump a bunch of shitty games on the market. Really is that simple. And the easy way of getting over open world fatigue is using your money to buy the good games and using the precious hours of your life to do anything, and I mean anything, else.
Personally, I think books are really cool. I can recommend a few in future videos. Like and subscribe. But every person on this earth should take the time to at least try one of the big names in the open world genre, to at the very least get a sense of what video games can accomplish as a medium. And the whole thing about open world games selling well is that they allow a person to do something other mediums can't. They allow a person to explore a world. They employ the interactivity of games to allow us to actually explore that mountain in a fantasy kingdom, instead of watching some actors in a movie do it. Open worlds are a great video game genre because they expand upon the promise of exploring a 3D dimensional map, free from the jump-based mechanics and kid-friendly aesthetics of the majority of 3D platformers. Not that there's anything wrong with jumping around in a Saturday morning cartoon, but having a genre named open world means just having an open world sufficient to fit the criteria. A number of secondary mechanics and settings can fit into the genre, giving developers a greater degree of freedom to create an open world, which is engaging to explore for whoever knows how long, but likely a long period of time if the game's good. A number of open worlds are straight up RPGs, and they have that little addictive addition of levels and getting better gear and equipment to encourage players to continue going that extra hour to explore some cave to make them that little bit stronger. You explore the world to make yourself stronger for future challenges in that world. Mechanics support one another. Good development 101. Game's gotta be good to be worth continue playing. On the discussion of open world fatigue, a lot of ire has been directed at the Ubisoft formula in particular. As I said earlier, when Elden Ring was released, you had that famous image favorably comparing it to a Ubisoft-styled game. Joke being, well, Elden Ring generally let you explore however and wherever you wanted without too many distractions. If it had been developed by Ubisoft, its UI would be littered with icons demonstrating things for you to do, and the game would be cluttered with distraction. That's part of how discussions naturally roll when saying Elden Ring and the Switch 3D Zeldas are good, but most open world games are bad. The former allows a player the magic of exploration, while the latter is a checklist of activities meant to distract a player. With the checklist, there's a bit of development 101 of side activities strengthening the player in some way, which is partially why they feel annoying, because the non-insignificant number are mandatory in order to get strong enough to face tough missions in the late game, making them feel more like work than like you're organically becoming stronger by finding a better sword in a random cave or something. And with the fact that the Ubisoft model is built on towers, you rarely ever come across these little activities naturally. You look for a tower and the checklist activities appear on your map, and you do as many as you have to become as strong as you need. It's all a bit laborious. Yeah. As much as this is the dominant explanation for why some open worlds are highly revered and others derided, I don't believe it's the full story, because while that style open world can feel more like work than leisure, there are games in the Ubisoft model I don't love, but like. They're just rarely Ubisoft games. They're the Horizon games and Ghost of Tsushima. Sony published games, but very much contain the climb tower, find activities, get stronger for later level missions, the works. What makes Horizon and Ghost of Tsushima so different from Ubisoft games? If they're made so similarly, how come you enjoyed those games so much more? Huh? It's the worlds. I also like Ghost's take on Arkham-style combat, but yeah, I dig exploring the mixture of lush vegetation and the mechanic Jurassic world of Horizon. It's also amazing going on horseback and seeing a feudal Japanese landscape in a myriad of bright, vivid colors and ghosts. A lot of the busy work of the Ubisoft model straight up feels like less of a burden when the actual world you're traveling through to do the busy work is beautiful to look at.
Main arguments. A massive component of what makes an open world game good and interesting is the world you, the player, are exploring. Duh. Kind of. But it turns out, creating an interesting world worth bothering to explore is kind of the big selling point for open world games.
The other thing which differentiates Ubisoft open world games from others on the market, besides the fact Ubisoft has decided to share ideas from all their games like towers, icons for activities, bases to liberate, gear collecting, and recently, leveled areas. Yes, that great thing to have in an open world game. Level markers to inform a player, you will get stomped here if you dare explore our open worlds. Amazing idea. Ubisoft games are generally also set in a realist setting, usually. This doesn't lead to uninteresting worlds to explore, per se. Assassin's Creed is Ubisoft's flagship series since a lot of us purchased at least one of the games, because there's an innate interest in exploring a recreation of a famous historical period. If much of the appeal of games more complex than Tetris is selling a customer the ability to actually do things they daydreamed about, a lot of us after reading something about the Italian Renaissance have thought to ourselves, man, wouldn't it be cool exploring Venice with Da Vinci? Or we wanted to witness the French Revolution or the Peloponnesian War as a safe spectator. Half, if not the majority of the appeal of the Assassin's Creed games is freely exploring a famous historical setting. Because let's face it, the actual assassinations are outclassed by other games on the market. The worlds in the Assassin's Creed games are at the very least genuinely gorgeous. Assassin's Creed 2 is designated as one of the good ones, in large part because Renaissance Florence and Venice are both faithfully recreated, and they're Florence and Venice during the Renaissance. They're beautiful locations simply to parkour around. Unity is not well remembered for the initial bugs upon release and other issues not within the scope of this video, but you are exploring Paris in-game, both during the Revolutionary period and even other eras like the Belle Epoque, and some of you like exploring the world of Odyssey, despite it being level locked, a bunch of uninteresting towns and bases everywhere, in between pretty land and sea that feels frankly empty to explore. To me, my opinion. Side note, I started playing Odyssey for the first time this video, and I learned Assassin's Creed is also trying to rip off Witcher Bioware romance options, while not having the dialogue and writing to make them work at all.
Before we get serious, how about we finally have some fun? I appreciate your help, but I'm not sure.
I thought there was something between us.
At times it felt that way, but not enough for me. Let's keep our focus on what's important here.
After everything I found, I know what's going on.
And what's that?
You don't deserve any of this. You're only trying to live your life.
Of course I am. I've done nothing wrong. I just want to have a healthy father and to start my journey.
You can start that after we have a little fun.
I do enjoy your attempts. Tell me, what is it that's meant to make me swoon this time?
If you undress me, I think you'll find out.
I can do that.
But Assassin's Creed is just one of Ubisoft's many open world franchises. The rest, generally, with like a few counterexamples that can be counted on one hand, take place in not some fictional, speculative setting, but are set in a location in this world you could go outside and actually freely explore. If you're sick of the Ubisoft formula. Like y'all say you are. Satanic, pederast rap stars are the actual puppet masters of politics and finance, not Templars, but Ubisoft games usually take place on a recognizable Earth, which begins to become a problem when the locations Ubisoft games are set in would be better to actually, explore in person rather than in a game. Do any of you guys really want to drive long stretches of time in an empty digital Bolivian landscape over just purchasing a plane ticket to La Paz and taking the fresh air of the Andes yourself, instead of wasting too much time of your life doing whatever this is? Some of it's admittedly pretty. This is where a lot of the criticism of the Ubisoft model comes to materialize, since because of the fact that it's not interesting whatsoever to explore many of these open, explorable worlds, which is the point of open world games, and since Ubisoft games, unlike Rockstar games, usually heavily penalize you for daring to treat a video game as not real life and cause some mayhem, there is usually absolutely no point in actually engaging and taking in much of the open world the developers have created. The world comes to be treated by the player as some kind of downtime obstacle between another tower, another base, another side mission, which are all recognizably similar to a fault. And yeah, it's best in a life to play one or two of the good Ubisoft open world games like Assassin's Creed 2 or Far Cry 3 and skip the rest. Far Cry may be the best demonstration of Ubisoft knowing its own limitations, because while the Far Cry series before 3 had been going on for a while, 3 was really the game to give the series its now recognizable identity, with the player given a bunch of powers and weapons to engage in violence in a setting that's far cry from civilization as we know it. The Indonesian islands, the Himalayan mountains, and the Caribbean islands all are beautiful settings. It's just not that hard as a Westerner to travel cheaply to any of these places currently. And if you do your research, you can travel within these places pretty safely. So again, like many of Ubisoft's open worlds, the setting itself is kind of forgotten as you do the towers, bases, side missions, repeat. To make this all more interesting, by Far Cry 3, the series began adding in a lot more surrealist elements, with drug trips and spiritualistic hallucinations, and the series became known for charismatic villains you do the towers, bases, side missions, so you could watch or hear the Batman villain of the game acting crazy, suffering through gameplay, so you can watch cutscenes and hear dialogue. A great thing to have as a highlight in an open world game. Far Cry 3, at least, is a classic. It's a classic in the same way Scarface is a classic, not in the way Apocalypse Now is a classic. A very good, but not quite great piece of media. Because Far Cry 3 was very good and sold decently, Ubisoft proceeded to ruin the goodwill of the franchise and just use Far Cry 3 as a base model to copy-paste settings for future games in the franchise, as well as other franchises. I'm pretty fucking sure the focus on bases in nearly all Ubisoft games begins here. Cool to do once, but I have visiting the equatorial tropics on my actual bucket list. So it's pretty easy to understand why this model has fallen into derision. Yes, the UIs are cluttered, and the weedification of everything after the Marvel movies last decade was a low point for writing.
Shitballs.
But But those are problems that can be tolerated if other things like the gameplay, the core aspect motivating a purchase usually for a video game, are good. While Ghost of Tsushima is free from poor dialogue and a cluttered UI, the Horizon games really aren't. But the Horizon games are worth playing, unlike a lot of Ubisoft games, despite still having the map fog, towers, and markers, which define the Ubisoft model for open world games, because Horizon does interesting stuff with combat besides done-to-death assault rifle shooting. And the world of Titanian dinos is actually cool. You still mostly walk by much of the world, but it's fantastic, creative, and interesting. It's Mecha Dinos, which you can ride on to get around, I forgot to mention. It's your latent, forgotten childhood fantasies made real in a game. Of course that's better than crashing into cars in some shitty city like Chicago. It's not merely what you're doing in the open world, which has been the big, this is why Breath of the Wild and Elden Ring are good and Ubisoft games suck, part of the argument. A big component of what makes a good open world is the setting. The open world you, the player, are exploring has to, in one way or another, be a world you'd actually like to explore. That's part of the reason why Ghost of Tsushima, the Horizon games, and Assassin's Creed 2 while we're at it, are worth playing despite the typical Ubisoft trappings. They're all set in actual worlds which make use of the ability to go anywhere you want, contain actual places and landscapes you'd actually want to see and explore. An actual interesting world can make up for lacking mechanics and activities, because the appeal of exploring a particular open world should not really be tangential to the experience. It's a selling point on the back of the box, or on a Steam page. It's a large part of the reason these games sell so well. Let's go back to sales for a little bit, about how well a lot of these games sell. You know why these games sell well. Yes, you do. I'm talking to you, not the royal you or whatever.
Hi, the royal we.
You know why you bought your first open world game, and I can guess it was similar to why I bought my first open world game. You purchased your first open world game, likely, because it sold you the idea of being able to explore in any direction, some fantastical landscape you fantasize about. That's a real appeal of these games. After Grand Theft Auto, the best-selling open world games are mostly games set in a traditional European fantasy setting. Skyrim, the Zelda Switch games, The Witcher 3, Elden Ring. Being a knight fighting dragons is like a universal fantasy globally these days. Zelda and Elden Ring are Japanese developed games, right? Goblins and wizardry is a multinational 21st century industry. A lot of us grew up with the general cultural ambience of Tolkien, Harry Potter, Disney, fucking Shrek, and damn near every one of us after watching and reading about these worlds thought to ourselves, damn, wouldn't it be cool actually living in a world like that? Playing with wooden swords on a playground gets you strange looks after 23, believe me, so next best thing is to play in a created space, what will never be. There's the pre-Breath of the Wild Zelda games which scratch the itch too, though the games between the first NES title and the Switch games are more linear than a traditional open world game. But Oblivion! Remember how amazing playing Oblivion felt when you were 12 and didn't know what things like tastes and standards were? Forget this if you're in your 40s and played Morrowind at 18 or something. Oblivion sold really well, and there was a reason it captured our collective attention for its generation despite the game's obliviousness.
What's done is done. What's done is done.
It was amazing being able to play a fantasy game that allowed you to freely explore fantasy worlds. Besides Zelda, at the time there really hadn't been a fantasy game before, accessible to dumb kiddies like myself, at its graphical fidelity that allowed you to wander around to your heart's content in the way Oblivion did. That's why we all looked over its issues at the time. The fact that Oblivion was generic fantasy, like really generic fantasy, a dumb kid whose frontal lobe hasn't fully developed the idea of a fantasy world, probably actually assisted the initial sales of the game. A lot of us didn't explore the vastly more interesting and alien world of Ardenfell. The Elder Scrolls 4 were unfamiliar words. Fantastical gibberish that importantly sold the setting of a fairy tale world, with orcs, elves, goblins, undead skeletons, and demons. Okay, they're Daedra, and that's a unique thing about the Elder Scrolls, but it's all hidden behind the generic fantasy aesthetic of it all. Cyrodiil is a platonic vision of a fantasy world, now made antiquated and kind of boring with how many fantasy worlds there are in the gaming landscape. But in 2006, that was fine. That was even kind of the point. It was very easy to overlook that Oblivion is an objectively awful RPG with its level scaling, because the level scaling allowed all us dumb kids whose parents bought the game for us to do what we actually got the game for, to do whatever immediately in any direction, when we wanted. It didn't really matter if at the end of the main quest, your character was only level 4 and because the scaling system was still fighting imps, or if you completely ignored the main quest, which framed itself as pressing, seeing as it was about preventing the end of the world and everything. Seems important, but not as important as checking out this hot gang of female bandits robbing married men everyone in Nanville's been talking about, or kill people as members of the Dark Brotherhood, or kill people in the arena, or kill goblins in a cave, or kill goblins in an identical-looking cave. Returning to Oblivion after more than a decade for this video, I can safely say Morrowind, Skyrim, Oblivion. Can't speak much on the games which are more or less pixels. It's not even that Skyrim is a better game than Oblivion, it's that, yeah, much of the formula for modern Elder Scrolls was established in Morrowind, but Oblivion was really responsible for creating what we think of as a Bethesda RPG. And as the products of years of refinement, Skyrim is Oblivion but better. I was having a pleasant time, actually, going back and getting the footage of what I needed for Skyrim. I can't say the same for Oblivion. Morrowind's probably the best out of all of them, because there's real RPG meat to its bones, and the reality that every player character in modern Bethesda games eventually feels like in every class is a very valid criticism. But Morrowind is almost a different kind of game than what Bethesda's going for now, with the main quest always being in the background and side missions and activities existing to make your player character stronger for the main quest. And you have to be a certain level to do certain missions in the main quest. Bethesda games are built more around exploring worlds over RPG depth now, and Skyrim is a much more interesting place to explore than Cyrodiil. It's things like dungeons being handcrafted, to not just the main gated cities being distinct from one another, but individual regions too. The Reach feels like it's on a whole other side of the country than the Rift through more than mere distance. There are also noticeable visual geographical differences which separate and make distinct the Goldleaf Forest and tranquil rivers of the Rift to the Dwarven architecture, green mountains, and mists of the Reach. There's also obvious differences in culture between the two areas. The whole continent of Tamriel is better detailed in Skyrim than Oblivion, because the Britain terrorists known in-game as the Forlorn are a problem in the Reach and not the Rift, which makes sense, because the Britain homeland neighbors the Reach and Markoth, not the Rift. Oblivion had the problem, with exception to the snowy areas near Bruma, of everywhere else in Cyrodiil being mainly grassy hills and forests. Fine enough to explore in 2006, but now, the only major city in Cyrodiil to feel really unique is the Imperial City that you start next to after you leave the prison. Maybe Skingrad is kind of unique with its stone buildings and wineries. There are details to Coral and Shadenhall to separate one city from another, but it's not to the degree Skyrim made each gated city visually unique. You get it? You're looking at the footage. Most of you have played these games. You know what I'm talking about.
I'm not talking about two Elder Scrolls games at length for no reason. There's a larger point I want to make about open world games as a whole, which returns us to the importance of setting.
It's pretty important for an open world game to actually be interesting to explore, and in many ways, the ability of a developer to create a genuinely interesting world, showing a player things they've never seen before to recreate that sense of wonder we felt when young when first learning about the mysteries of our world, or coming across a piece of art which caused us to reassess our understanding of ourselves, is in many ways a test of creative talent for developers. With the fact that we all have this broad cultural knowledge of a fantasy world, and live under capitalism, we're all aware of the traditional fantasy tropes, and yeah, it says something about both our culture and our economic system that fantasy, of all things, can come across as boring and been done. But that's the way things are. We don't want just trolls, dragons, knights, and wizards. There needs to be that little bit of creativity, enacted by human beings, to warp tropes ever so slightly into being fresh and distinct again. Take the example of goblins. It's not enough for us to enjoy killing these dumb green little men who reside in caves and are cute in a weird way. We need our goblins slightly spicy, whether they be called bokoblins and have these boar-like features not associated with the traditional idea of goblins, or they're not goblins at all, but elves who have lived underground for such a long time they've gone feral, and their appearance has warped to resemble goblins. A large incentive to exploring the better developed dungeons of the next game in the series is to find out the lore explaining what these yellow goblin-like creatures exactly are. Or they behave exactly like goblins, look like them too, except for being slightly hairier, but they're not goblins. They're called demi-humans. Elden Ring's world is sufficiently unique to get a pass on this front. Because of the importance of an actual world to an open world game, genuine, real artistry and craft in the creation of that world shines through, because there's a difference between your game being a Game of the Year contender and being a must-play artistic experience before you die, and your game becoming a bargain bin title forgotten except by the board with $20 to waste walking by one of the last GameStops in a mall. It's not too dissimilar to the relationship of a Caravaggio Madonna and the thousands of other Madonna paintings by by forgotten names you can't help but indifferently walk past in an art museum. The Vatican had a stranglehold on the visual arts for the longest time, and required artists to paint the same scenes from the Bible over and over. Vast majority of those to-be-forgotten Madonna paintings are technically competent, but a lot of them are too similar to one another and blend into one another in memory space to become just another Madonna painting, because there's that lack of something to distinguish one painting in a museum hallway from another. But the expression of a unique artistic vision and intent is very much possible in a been-done-to-death scene. That's why Madonna by Caravaggio or Titian or Botticelli is much better known to the wider public, because the unique artistic attributes and habits of those individual artists are still able to be expressed within the familiar scene. And so it is with open world games, with there being a number of generic worlds and games to be forgotten, but there are also absolute masterpieces which are likely to be the showpieces for the capabilities of the medium. In the year 2025, with every other medium besides games from books, TV, music, film, all seeming like they're near death's door, there's an awareness we all have that a culture for an artistic medium can die. And if there's any genre of games that's going to be the inform your grandkids' kids who are too busy fighting for their lives in the water wars to have much of an interest in gaming, what games could accomplish as a medium, open worlds of the genre, some arcane scholar would show those kids to demonstrate what the medium could really accomplish. They're what the drum is to film, in many ways. In an interactive medium, the open world is kind of the royal gem all ambitious developers aim for, and there needs to be the creative talent on the developer's part to meet that creative ambition. What we're talking about with open world glut is often developers attempting to meet that ambition and failing, or their publisher wants them to create slapdash work for a quick buck. More likely explanation, honestly.
But I don't mean to imply a good open world game needs to be set in a fantastical setting.
There's that very important example I mentioned earlier of Rockstar titles with Grand Theft Auto and the Red Dead Redemption games, which demonstrate that interesting worlds are possible in a realist setting. What differentiates a Rockstar realist setting from really any realist open world setting by any other developer, Rockstar kind of has exclusive ownership for Masterpiece realist open world games in my opinion. Emphasis on Masterpiece for anyone who wants to check me on my praise for Assassin's Creed 2 and Ghost of Tsushima. It's a painstaking, often unethical, sense of detail Rockstar has put into their games since GTA 4. But really, you can see their tendencies towards favoring extreme detail developing already in San Andreas, with San Andreas much better resembling California and Nevada than GTA 3 ever did New York. San Andreas' ability to fully recreate Los Angeles, of course, being hampered by the technical limitations of the time, but hey, that's what GTA 5 is for, right? One of the defining features of a modern Rockstar game is how much it feels like living in a space in the real world, in part done by copying the feel and look of real-world locations like New York and Los Angeles for the fictional settings of Liberty City and Los Santos in GTA 4 and 5 respectively, to make it just feel like as a player, you're causing mayhem in one of America's major coastal urban centers. I went to high school in LA, and I remember me and my buds when GTA 5 was first released, after the obvious joke that the traffic is much worse in Los Angeles than Los Santos, mentioning to each other that GTA 5 just was Los Angeles. It's pretty incredible what they accomplished, and if you've ever been a true Angelino, I'm not proud to say it, but if quoting Tool's Enema is tacky after 16, well... And Rockstar does interesting thematic things with having the settings of their games be integral to an individual game's plot, in contrast to most other realist open world games. It also helps that New York, Los Angeles, and Miami are all places more worth having something to say about than fucking Chicago. But Rockstar, pioneers of the open world as we know it, learned a benefit of a realist setting is to use a setting to say something poignant about American society. GTA 5's story mostly mocks Los Angeles culture as hollow and barely worth living for, and fair, but GTA 4 uses the New York setting to tell its version of the immigrants, the American dream is a lie story. And GTA 4's take is like Caravaggio of that story. Grand Theft Auto 4 remains the best representation of New York in a game. I don't think any other developer has bothered with modern New York for a setting, because they're understandably like, yeah, why bother? Rockstar didn't just get good at writing stories. Trust me, as someone who loves art house movies and modernist fiction, I do not say this lightly. The Rockstar team became some of the best storytellers ever. Not good for games good, but especially with Red Dead Redemption 2, demonstrated a literary style talent in their writing that I'd go so far to say Red Dead 2 is the best Western story told in any medium. There's Butcher's Crossing and a few McCartney books which can compete, but it came out he groomed a teenager, so obviously my opinion and taste is correct. People didn't see their families during the creation of Red Dead 2. Since Red Dead 2 is going to sell trillions regardless, I kind of view the thing as more Stanley Kubrick crazed perfectionism killing his actors and worker exploitation, but Kubrick's poor treatment of his actors was very bad too, of course. There's been growing criticism over the years of the claimed dated design of Rockstar games. Much like open world critique generally, you're likely familiar with the criticism already. If you're not, to quickly summarize, is that there's a claimed disconnect between the freedom in Rockstar's open worlds and the linear mission structures which compose the main and side quests of their games. If you want to hear the criticism in fuller detail, I'll link to the dominant video essay by Nakey Jakey elaborating the view, which is centered on Red Dead 2. Like with open world critique generally, I don't fully agree with this line of criticism. At a base media gameplay level, yeah, there's a bit of a disconnect between the mission structures of Red Dead 2 and the open-ended nature of what you're doing when you're not in a mission. But to me, the disconnect is kind of exaggerated because the missions and open worlds in the Red Dead games, and really all Rockstar games, are connected thematically. Both Red Dead games are about the decline of the West, of the lifestyle of cowboys and bandits living off the land and their own wits is ending because of the ever-moving encroachment of industrialized civilization. The emphasis on the bunny quotes. So in both Red Dead games, in your free downtime, when you're exploring on Horror's beautiful wilderness and just mucking around with the cornucopia of activities Rockstar decided was more valuable than their employees being able to see sunlight, there's an intuitive understanding on the player's part on why the freedom of the West is worth missing. The freedom to traverse a mountain, forest, or bog and do whatever is coming to an end due to manifest destiny. You get to feel the inherent sadness of this inevitability through exploring the beauty of the American West in gameplay.
Okay, going into greater detail why Red Dead 2 is a great game is a video in itself. But I think my brief point serves as decent illustration why Rockstar rules, like I said, I think dominates the realist open worlds.
Rockstar makes realist open world games you still want to actively explore instead of going for merely one mission after the next. I know I'm much more motivated while playing Rockstar games to fuck off, ignore missions, and do my own thing than I am with any Ubisoft game. So if we continue with the art metaphor, Rockstar has been able to create interesting worlds, less through surrealism and abstraction, but through painstakingly recreating existing space and code. There's a strong romantic current in the Red Dead games. And if you were to tell me Rockstar was influenced by American-Canadian landscape painters like Deacon and Groose during the creation of Red Dead 1 and 2, I'd believe you. Because in the Red Dead series, there's an obvious emphasis placed on the inherent sublime beauty of not just the American landscape, but nature generally. I guess Ubisoft realist games show the beauty of nature too, but not to the same, reliable, consistent degree as the Red Dead games. You feel me?
Creating an interesting space a player actually wants to bother to explore. It's a real art, requiring human creativity, judgment, an understanding of what makes us human beings see something off in the distance and think to ourselves, I want to see that up close. With the freedom of video games, be able to do so.
Whether that be seeing the northern lights on top of Mountain Peak, a massive surrealist statue at the bottom of an underworld cave, a bog, jungles, peaceful dragons flying over canyons and lakes, there's a real talent necessary to create a space sufficiently interesting and beautiful enough to explore for tens, if not hundreds of hours. Not only does it take years of hard work to create a sufficiently interesting space millions of human beings want to explore, it also takes soul. In this world where we understand vibes as being a thing, it's easy to tell when care, and yes, even love, has been put into a world and work, and when something's been quickly made solely to increase shareholder value. I've talked about the Switch Zeldas in passing frequently throughout this video, quite a bit already. Much of the reason why the Switch Zeldas are highly regarded is already well known. They encourage curious exploration of a space like few other games. But what makes the world of Hyrule and Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom interesting to explore? Part of it is that 3D Zelda titles before the switch up in formula created a distinct fantastical mythos to the Zelda games Breath and Tears benefit tremendously from. As mentioned, they're the Zelda series spicy goblins known as bokoblins and moblins, present in the series even before the 3D titles, sharing boar-like features obviously because Ganon, the bestial form of the main antagonist of the series, is a massive evil boar, and there's semantic coherence in having his underling share his features. There's also the fish, rock, bird, and Sam women races that have been added to the world of Hyrule through a number of installments, importantly giving the world of Zelda a sense of identity separate from the fantasy tropes of elves, dwarves, you get it. Still, in Breath especially, a lot of the world of Hyrule is, well, wilds. Forests, mountains, coastal shores. Not quite the surreal world of pure imagination you'd find in the often compared to Elden Ring. But the Hyrule of the Switch Zeldas remains interesting to explore anyway. Why is that? Why is the tropical coast in Breath or Tears much more interesting to explore than a similar area in Far Cry? Well, it's due to the artistry on display in the creation of Hyrule. There's both the obvious greater interest at a development level with the Zelda open world games, containing little high points piquing the curiosity of the player, and having the climbing mechanics in the Zelda open world games facilitate that curiosity better than a Far Cry title, where if you were curious on how to get to the top of a mountain, most likely you just drive up a road and that'd be that. But the subtle, artistic choices in Breath and Tears are what's really responsible for creating this atmosphere and ambiance and making the world of Hyrule one a player wants to live in. There's a quiet, minimalistic music, long blades of grass and other bits of greenery dancing with the wind, wildlife that behaves realistically and appears to live apathetic to you instead of serving as enemies wanting to kill you all the time, that make the Switch Zeldas beautiful in the way a great pastoral painting is. There's a decision on the part of an artistic team to highlight something we naturally find beautiful, like the natural world, and alter it ever so slightly with human creativity and judgment to elevate its beauty. The Switch Zeldas also masterfully create the illusion that Hyrule is a lived-in place. Part of the illusion is created with the previously mentioned wildlife that behaves realistically. Part of it is due to the fact that while NPCs, like most video game NPCs, repeat dialogue, there seems to be a real life to them to create the illusion they have minds. The miraculous physics in-game give a tangibility to everything from trees to boulders, creating a deep sense of immersion. The spicy goblins, the enemy AI, also famously has the appearance of real life to it, instead of merely engaging in the same predictable behaviors. And all these small things come together to create the feel of an actual place. Real wilds, not just a mere geographical obstacle with bits of foliage in it, but a place that is itself the attraction. Assisting things is that the Switch Zelda's art style takes obvious inspiration from French Impressionism, employing tricks with color and light to enhance the beauty of a natural scene, much in the same way Monet did. So like we saw with the Red Dead games, an interesting world to explore does not require the fantastic and surreal. It more requires human creativity and judgment to make that world interesting, and if the world resembles a recognizable setting like mountains and forests, subtle artistic touches to enhance the beauty of the world are likely necessary to make the world intriguing. Exploring a massive world that's been given time, labor, and attention put into it is a big part of the reason this interactive medium is both popular and worth talking about. Yeah, exploration isn't really unique to open world games. You have to have more options to explore a smaller space in an immersive sim, and Metroidvanias exist, but it's a matter of scale, right? Like, the Metroidvania is a plague of the indie sphere in the same way the open world is in the AAA space, because Metroidvanias are the genre to get yourself involved with if you're a small team lacking the resources of a AAA developer, but still want to create an interesting world for players to explore. And a lot of those indie Metroidvanias are great. Hollow Knight is a must-play, but being a team of 3 people can only take your artistic vision so far, right?
AAA open worlds are peak reach in the game, man. We want these crazy, detailed places to escape to. For me, actually exploring an imagined setting is a big reason why I prefer video games for speculative works over books and movies.
Because of our economic system, there will be trend chasers inartfully copying the masterworks of the medium, doomed to be the case for considerable time to come, because the open world genre is great, and future and established talents in gaming are going to create future masterpieces within the genre because of the immense creative potential in manifesting whatever content human beings can think of into code. Yes, that means there will continue to be okay to bad open world games. But I have fantastic news. You don't need to play them! I mean, I might have to because of the bonobos. But this whole video game media ecosystem exists in part to inform you guys what games are worth your time and money. Go ahead and skip the soulless Ubisoft cash cows trying to make a buck. Me, established journalist sites, and a million other creators are going to be here to inform you which open world games are the Elden Rings and Breath of the Wilds of tomorrow. And you will buy those future masterpieces because you know already, there's nothing like seeing that mysterious building off in the horizon, thinking to yourself, huh, I wonder what's in there, and having fun satiating your curiosity, while likely seeing some pretty visuals along the way. You'll call that future greatest of all time another one of the few actually good open world games, which is alright, because while exploring that world on horseback or by car, recalling that sense of wanderlust you felt in Skyrim, The Witcher 3, New Vegas, Banjo-Kazooie, it'll all be a reminder why, despite the number of bad to mediocre releases in the genre, that there remains something special to open world games. Exploring a great open world is like reading a classic novel or listening to a treasured symphony. It's a great creative experience to enjoy with your time on this earth, man.
Yeah, I'm done with the gimmick. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, both here and on the Ko-Fi. Seriously, my bonobo shares are worth less than that Hawk Tuah coin.
This has been an Arcane Incorporated production, and I'll see you next time.